This week on The Climate Show, how do we get our cities to move from this, blighted by congestion, cursed by pollution and worsening climate change, to this, a cleaner, calmer, healthier city which is actually easy to get around? Hello and welcome to The Climate Show. And this week we're all about cities, their congestion and their traffic. How do we make them more climate friendly in the future? And I've come to Oxford because this is one of the places on the front line of this argument. I'll also be travelling to a city in Belgium where they've managed to dethrone the car as king and claim they've got a much more pleasant environment as a result. We'll also be in London to hear how plans for cleaner air are pitting the mayor against many motorists, and go to Wales, where the Welsh Government is taking radical action and scrapping nearly all of its road building plans. But first, here in the city of dreaming spires, the row over roads has turned almost as toxic as the air the councils want to clean. In the ancient city of Oxford, people and goods are struggling to move around freely. While the council makes plans, businesses are already adapting. Jake used to deliver with diesel vans, but became uneasy with their pollution, and so did some of his customers. This takes me back. I used to be a cycle courier when I was a student. And I joined him on a delivery round. Many cities suffer from similar transport woes to Oxford. Gridlock, pollution, climate worries with a population that continues to grow and doesn't get enough exercise. Bath, Cambridge, Bristol, Newcastle and Edinburgh are all grappling for a solution and share a common enemy, the car. Less of these diesel vehicles, less vehicles within the city. I formed this business with my business partner. We both have young children who grew up in this city and will continue to grow up in this city, and we want them to be safe, we want them to breathe clean air, and we want them to have a clean and positive future. It really is as simple as trying to make it a more pleasant place to live. The Oxfordshire plan divides the city into 6 zones. Each zone will have a filter road that means you won't be able to drive from zone to zone, but walk, cycle or take public transport. Drivers will have to go out to the ring road, round and back in again. However, residents will get 100 passes a year to cut through the zones. And there are exemptions. For example, blue badge holders, carers and community nurses can drive freely. And these aren't the first restrictions on motorist freedom. The council does have a bit of previous. Low traffic neighbourhoods are already in place in some parts of Oxford, like here, around the Cowley Road. They restrict the freedom of movement of drivers, and many businesses along here think it restricts their profits too. This is one of them, Coco's.
The trouble is that people just aren't bothering to come anymore. No car parking, they can't stop and collect their goods from certain specialist food shops that are up the road. Delivery drivers can't get around to get their thing. Taxi drivers don't want to come. And people fixing the plumber, electricians, they're not wanting to come because it takes them too long and they've got nowhere to park.
You'd agree climate change is a problem?
Yep.
Pollution's a problem?
Yep. I completely agree, but unfortunately you have to work these things through properly. They haven't. They've just blanketly done it.
This is actually one of the most polluted spots in Oxford.
The plan's supporters have done opinion polls and studied council election results.
I think the opposition is loud rather than widespread. We did a YouGov poll, which was representative across age groups and across, political bias and all kinds of things. And 2-to-1 people are in favour of low traffic neighbourhoods and 2-to-1 people are in favour of traffic filters. And in the last local elections, a set of candidates stood on specifically an anti-local low traffic neighbourhood policy, and none of them won, apart from one who was already an incumbent and changed policy. So when it comes down to the actual democracy and how people vote, people are consistently voting for parties who choose this.
Let's go to a city that has been through all this and, supporters say, shows us a desirable future. This is the Belgian city of Ghent. Population 500,000, and it looks like a good chunk of their transport is right here. 6 years ago, they introduced their traffic or circulation plan, which, somewhat like Oxford, restricted car access to the city centre and between residential neighbourhoods. The effect has been dramatic. It's so tranquil and traffic-free, it hardly feels like you're in a city centre. Yet this is one of the main junctions. It's extraordinarily calm. I caught up with the architect of this plan, in the saddle, of course.
This is how a city should be. Space, many people walking, people cycling, people enjoying the city. That's why we did it. We gave the road to the cyclists, and so we gave the former cycle path to the pedestrians, and so more space for pedestrians, more space for cyclists.
Fewer cars demand fewer places to leave them. This was a car park. It's now a park, complete with built-in trampoline. And a little further on, they freed the water. So what's the name of this river?
This is the Besdomkai. This is the Bavo Bridge. There was a river, but it was underground. And on the surface, there was a parking spot, just cars. And what we did after the circulation plan, because we didn't need that parking spot anymore, we opened the river again. And so you see, it became one of the most beautiful places here in Ghent.
And it is so quiet here, isn't it? I mean, it's a really pleasant place to be.
Before, there were traffic jams everywhere. That traffic jam is gone, doesn't exist anymore. At that moment, the city became more friendly for people, and that was the purpose.
But the process was far from friendly. Many people love their cars, and others need the business they bring. Challenge that at your peril.
It was a period of death threats, of insults.
Death threats for you?
Death threats for me, yeah, for me and my family. And so I had 6 weeks of police surveillance. It was not pleasant at all. It was very rough, difficult, but it was worth it.
A few years on and tempers may have cooled, but it's not a city entirely of converts.
We come in the city from 6 till 11. That's a problem because there are a lot of people in the restaurants. We have to deliver early in the morning.
But doesn't it make it much easier for you to get around?
No. We have a lot of clients and we have to deliver on certain hours. So it's not easy. It's full of bicycles. They don't have lights. They drive without arms. They are on the phone. Yeah.
I think it's a good thing that there are not too much cars, and it's better for the children that there are not too much cars inside the city centres.
In the years since the plan came in, walking has increased and cycling has doubled. But buses and trams have benefited too. Public transport usage has gone up about 12% since they brought in this plan. You can see how busy it is. And because there are fewer cars on the road, the trams can get around faster.
Hey.
You have a lot of friends on the street here.
Yeah, I know many people here.
Philippe insists the opposition to Ghent's travel plans was loud but small, and his re-election tends to back that up. Is that echoed back in Oxford, where some traffic-blocking bollards have been ripped up and wild conspiracy theories take root? Regime change is often brutal, not least taking the crown from the car. You may think this place in Belgium can teach us something, but our own capital city was a pioneer in taking on the car, introducing a congestion charge almost exactly 20 years ago. And now the anti-pollution fight continues with an attempt to expand the ultra-low emission zone. But so does the furious pushback. Here's Sky's Sabah Chowdhury.
Beautiful. You can take a photo of me.
Ella was a happy, healthy child until she developed the chronic asthma that led to her untimely death. She made history, the first person in the UK with air pollution listed as their cause of death. Now, 10 years on, her mother's working to clean the toxic air that took her daughter's life.
What the coroner did say, without the air pollution, not only would Ella not have got asthma, but on the night she died, it was the highest it had ever been until then. I think she'll be quite surprised at why she died and how many people are impacted, because she loved the air. She wanted to be a pilot. So I don't know how she would have taken that the air that she loved so much ultimately is what killed her.
Rosamond hopes the expansion of London's ultra-low emission zone, known as Ulez, will limit the number of old polluting cars entering the capital through deterrence. A £12.50 daily charge to drive inside and a fine for those who won't pay. Currently, Ulez covers inner London. From the end of August, it'll include all boroughs. Most areas are largely in favour of the expansion. Some are on the fence and want it delayed, but others are actively hostile and campaigning against it. And this isn't exclusive to London. Several cities across the UK also have clean air zones. And it seems to be working. Research shows pollution levels are more than 20% lower than they would have been without Ulez. Despite this, Heathrow shift worker Tina still has strong reservations. Driving this old diesel car to work will cost her an additional £4,000 a year, making the night bus her only affordable option.
Yes, you're working, but it's like everything's gone up. The cost of living's gone up, gas, electric, food. It's like, where are we going to find this extra money from? That's the main thing, is we don't have the finances.
Tina says Ulez is a tax on the poor. But for the Mayor of London, that's not the case.
How are people supposed to afford that during the cost of living crisis? It's a bold move to introduce Euless Expansion at this particular juncture, don't you think?
Well, I understand the challenges people are facing as a consequence of the government's policies. That's why we've announced the biggest scrappage scheme in history. It's the poorest Londoners breathing the worst of this pollution. Those who are driving polluting vehicles are breathing in the poison. Your kids in the back are breathing in poison. I think the choice is this. We can be the first generation to take action or the last generation not to.
Whether the mayor gets his wish or not, it'll come too late for Ella, whose mum will keep fighting the right of children to breathe cleaner air. Sabah Chowdhury, Sky News.
Although drivers of electric cars will be free to use London's ultra-low emission zone, here in Ghent they'll face much the same restrictions as other cars. And we had an interesting question about EVs from Nick, who tweeted to ask me, how long will it be before someone admits that electric cars won't save the planet, as there isn't enough of the rare earth minerals needed for everyone to make the switch? Well, is that true?
So thanks very much for your question, Nick, and you're quite right. For electric vehicles, we need to mine a lot of minerals. We need the rare earth elements, lithium, cobalt, a whole range of other things. The really important point is that there's no shortage of these in the Earth's crust. We know where many of those mineral deposits are. Now, ideally, we'd get those minerals from recycling, but right now there's not a lot of electric vehicles there to recycle. So we're going to have to mine. And of course, mining has to be done responsibly. We have to minimise environmental impacts. We have to ensure that the communities around are not suffering adverse impacts, all those kinds of things. And that takes time. And that is the challenge, making sure we can do that mining as quickly as possible, but as responsibly as possible.
And if you have a question you'd like us to try and answer on the programme, scan the QR code on your screen right now. After the break, world leading or economy wrecking? We'll hear how the Welsh Government has scrapped almost all of its major road building schemes. And we'll meet Kamar Omar, the TikTok star trying to inspire more women to take to two wheels. Welcome back to Ghent, a city that's being touted as a future urban paradise. If only we could swap our four wheels for two, or maybe even two legs. But choices like that are so much easier to say than do. The decisions we've made over where we live, where we socialise, where we work, even where we educate our children, have been taken with transport, quite probably driving in mind. And threatening that provokes, well, something like road rage. The Welsh Government has taken a bold approach. Stop building them largely altogether. Putting the brakes on carbon emissions and steering towards a less car-centric future. That was the message from the Welsh Government as they announced they were delaying, changing or scrapping nearly all major road projects planned in the country.
Around the world, countries have discovered that adding lanes just creates more traffic. In Wales, we can do it differently.
59 road building schemes had been on hold while a review was carried out to see if they were compatible with the country's climate change targets. But this week, the Labour government in Cardiff declared that only 15 would go ahead as planned. The rest dropped amended or scaled back.
Roads, we're not going to stop building roads, but we're going to build different types of roads, and we're going to have roads for bus space, active travel space, and for car space, and we're investing in alternatives.
Are you going to have some angry motorists in Wales?
Well, the problem is the debate around transport has become very polarised. It's been dragged into the culture wars. And whenever you try and do something to reform it, you're labelled instantly as being anti-car. And most politicians, therefore, run a mile. But I think given the science is getting harder and harder on climate change, we're just going to have to face up to it. Because if we don't make the changes, we'll keep getting into a worse situation.
While environmental groups called the policy change world-leading, the Conservative opposition in the Senedd expressed concern that it would limit growth.
To you, Deputy Minister, roads might be these awful stretches of concrete, but to us, businesses, commuters and residents, they are a necessity. We need adequate roads to run a top-quality public transport network, to help businesses thrive and to get the economy firing on all cylinders are just some of the few reasons why I speak so passionately about this.
So, another front of what some see as an emerging transport culture war without a quick victory. One thing is certain, turning around the oil tanker of car-based infrastructure will not be easy. Now, as you might be able to see, I'm in London, Chiswick to be precise, and this place has had its own row over street space with this cycle lane here behind me. And I'm with two people who are very at home in the urban jungle. That's Valentin and Tanya from the Centre for Cities think tank and Tanya Braun from the charity Living Street, which campaigns for better pedestrian infrastructure. Valentin, why are these changes so difficult, so hot, if you like?
I think that's because behaviour change, takes time. And, the reason why changing our attitudes to driving mainly has to do with the fact that cars still are the main mode of transport. Most journeys, even in London, are still made by car. So, switching from one mode of transport to another is a difficult move for many people.
People really love their cars, don't they, Tanya? It's difficult to get them out of them.
I mean, yeah, we've been building our cities, towns, neighbourhoods around cars since the 1960s. They dominate our everyday lives. But walking really is the easiest, most sustainable form of transport. And so I think these measures are really going to help us to turn around the issues that cars are causing through air pollution and inactivity.
Yeah. Anything to do with transport actually affects so much to do with our lives, not least business, Valentin. How do we think businesses could be affected by this move to, if you like, calmer, more tranquil cities?
So it's often a concern that's raised by businesses themselves in terms of the impact that these schemes will have on their activity. We've looked at the evidence from a number of schemes, whether that's in central London or in places like Birmingham that have introduced clean air zones. And looking at footfall and spending there doesn't show any evidence that it has had a clear impact, bad impact on their activity.
A good one either?
A good one, well, kind of same really. I think what we're seeing is that essentially, in places where either we have more cycle lanes or you have more pedestrian high streets, then people tend to spend more time in the area because it's just a nicer place to be around. And so they tend to spend not just more time, but also more money in the area. So actually the evidence shows that it's quite positive for businesses to have those schemes.
And Living Streets has done a pedestrian pound report looking at walking on the high street. We've actually found that when there are more walking journeys made, 40% more money is spent in the area.
Right, so it could be the saviour of the high street?
Could be the saviour of the high street.
That's quite a bold sales pitch, because certainly, as I say, in the short term, businesses mainly seem to be worried. I mean, we spoke to a guy in Oxford who said, look, if people can't drive in here from out of town, my restaurant's dead. I mean, he has maybe got a point, hasn't he?
Yeah, he does have a point, and I think part of the answer is that behaviour change does take time, and we shouldn't necessarily assess the impact of these schemes in the first 6 or 12 months, because it does take time for people to actually make a change. Now, I think it's very important to make sure that people who don't live in the city centres can still access the centre of the town.
I'm going to interrupt you because it's kind of relevant. I mean, the noise that's around us here illustrates that they aren't necessarily particularly pleasant places, and they could be much more pleasant, couldn't they, Tanya?
They really could. I mean, quieter, safer roads bring more people out, and I think more people out is a nicer place to be. I mean, it can be really small things that encourage people to ditch the car and walk instead, such as slower speeds on our roads, clearer pavements, nicer pavements, and yeah, just more people around.
Yeah, because some of this is about residential areas as well, isn't it? And moving through those. What do you think the sort of city of the future will or should look like, Valentin?
Well, it should be a city with fewer cars, but back to your point, we're seeing change not just in London, but across the UK. 5 years ago, barely any city in the UK had a clean air zone or a low emission zone. Now I think we have 6 and more to come, so that's a positive change. And the city of the future will be a city where, we have less toxic air. Toxic air is extremely harmful for human health and should be dealt with. So, more pedestrian areas, fewer cars, more people travelling, whether that's to commute or for leisure, using active travel.
Valentin, Tanya, thank you both very much indeed. Now, I want to introduce you to a woman who's taken to social media to try and encourage more women to take to the saddle.
Hi, my name's Kamal. I'm a teacher assistant working in a primary school. Cycling is something that I've always been into since I was a little girl, but I took it really serious since COVID started. I've asked around everybody that I knew if they had a spare bike in their houses, and then my older brother came to the house with a Brompton. That's when the adventure began, really. Riding a bike is so good for you, especially for your mental health and well-being. I mean, I know it's helped me a lot. From young age to old age, it's for everyone, really. I mean, one of the reasons why I use social media is just to show everyone that it's okay for women like me, as a Muslim woman wearing the headscarf and the whole abaya, that it's all right to cycle around. Last year, I took part in the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. I got to ride my bike around the mount. It was such an amazing experience to see everybody, cheering for us and cycling around. It was just amazing. I know, growing up in London, that the cycle lane has changed a lot. There are more cycle lanes than we ever had before. Will definitely build up a lot of women and other cyclists. They're confident to cycle on the roads.
Now, before we go, a reminder that you can catch the Daily Climate Show on Sky News. That's at 3:30 p.m. on weekdays. And you can get all the latest climate and environmental news on the Sky News app and website, or by scanning the QR code on your screen right now. That's it for this week. Next week, I'm going to be under these streets in London's super sewer as we look at how to tackle those sewage spills into rivers and into our sea. Who said TV wasn't glamorous? See you then.